Listeners, we will get to introductions, but before we do that, Raphael, I want to ask you, tell us something that you believe about real estate that might surprise us.
Well, I would say real estate is more than just numbers on a spreadsheet. Oftentimes you see investors that are saying, oh, well, everything looks great on paper, but when it comes to the mechanics of actually operating the property or executing the business plan, they get lost in the weeds. And so I often tell people, it's great that the numbers say this, but understand the nuances of actually owning property because it's a lot more complicated than a lot of people make it seem. So.
Listeners, welcome to The Source of Commercial Real Estate, where we talk to the experts in non-residential commercial real estate so you can grow your business, find a competitive advantage, and use real estate to live the life that you want. I am your host, Jonathan Hayek. I'm a former public school teacher who found financial freedom through residential real estate investing, and now I invest in commercial properties, particularly small industrial. And today I am talking with Raphael Collazo with the Grisanti Group. Raphael, it's a pleasure to have you here today. How are you doing?
Doing great, man. Can't complain. The weather's been great the last several weeks for us here in Louisville, Kentucky, and life is great. So definitely very blessed.
Raphael, I've been following you for several years. You've got a ton of content out on the internet, so I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Why don't we start out with you telling us a little bit about your background and how you found your way into real estate?
Yeah. First off, thanks for having me on. It's truly an honor. I appreciate you reaching out. I know you had interviewed a buddy of mine, Chad, on the podcast, and so I'm glad that he was able to connect us. But as far as my background, we can start from the beginning, I guess. My dad is a physician, but he was worked in the military in the Air Force, and so he was stationed in Northeast Italy in Aviano Air Base, and that's where he met my mother, who was working on base, and they ultimately had myself and my twin brother. So I actually was born in Italy, half Italian, half Puerto Rican, and my mom's side's still all over in Italy. But up until I was 5, I lived there, and then we got moved to Baumholder, which is a base in southern Germany. And I lived there for 3 years, and then we were relocated to Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe. It's SHAPE, which was in Belgium. And so I lived there for 5 years before locating to the U.S. back in 2004 when I was 13 years old. So I went to high school in Southern Arizona and then went to Arizona State University on scholarship where I studied industrial engineering and economics. And thereafter, I got into software development and consulting at a company that implemented software systems for government agencies. And so I traveled around the country. I lived in D.C. for a couple of years. I lived in San Juan, Puerto Rico for 2 years. And then after Hurricane Maria, that project got put on hold, and I was relocated to Louisville, Kentucky on a temporary basis, and then I ultimately turned to a more permanent basis when the project manager wanted to keep me around. So that's kind of the story up until what got me to Louisville. And then as far as commercial real estate is concerned, I've always been somewhat entrepreneurial. I had a catering company in college called Pasticity, where we used to sell different pasta recipes to different organizations on campus, and we even did some corporate lunches and stuff like that. And so after college, I took a year to try to get that off the ground. I managed a restaurant for a little while and built some relationships with local entrepreneurs who, kind of took a chance on me. And I tried to essentially establish a brick and mortar location, ultimately realized it was not what I wanted to do long term. But I always knew that I had that entrepreneurial itch. And so after, a period of time in my role as in the software development space, it was a very transitory role. So I was moving around every other year. They would move me to a new location. I knew it wasn't sustainable long term. And so my mom's a residential agent in Arizona. She's had a lot of success in her career since she's been in the space. And, at first I looked into residential real estate as an option, but it just didn't fit my personality very well. And then the more I looked at it, I looked into commercial real estate. It just kind of spoke to me. You deal with entrepreneurs, you deal with investors. It's a lot more business centric. And so I decided to take the leap and took a risk and jumped in, and I'm glad I did. Although the early years are definitely a struggle, as we'll probably touch on throughout this podcast, but it's definitely been worth the risk that I took. So.
Raphael, there's something in your bio that really struck me. I'm an avid traveler. I love traveling. And you've got this little piece of your website that talks about you having visited 40 countries and lived in 7. And I think you may have hit on some of that with growing up, being involved in the Air Force. Is that the totality of your traveling, or is that also an interest of yours?
Yeah, it's definitely an interest. I mean, my dad was definitely someone who loved to travel. So every year we would go somewhere. And at the time I didn't really appreciate it growing up because, you're 7 years old or 8 years old and they're pulling you to museums to look at art, or you're running along to see a statue in the middle of the piazza or whatever, and you're an 8 year old just being like, what the heck? Like, I want to go play and do stuff. And so at the time I definitely didn't like it, but now that looking back, I definitely have more of an appreciation for it, especially early on in my life. And so, as I got older and I started getting more means through the jobs that I took on, and I saved money, we would take these trips to different places. And one of the biggest trips I took was actually a whole month sabbatical. With my previous job, I was able to accumulate a lot of paid time off. I didn't take paid time off for like 2.5 years, and I was able to accumulate almost a month of vacation time. And my wife and I, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, we took a whole month and we did a whole Southeast Asia excursion where we went to like China, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Hong Kong, South Korea, Vietnam, Japan. So it was a whole month we were over there, and it was pretty exhausting. I mean, I won't lie. Every 2 to 3 days, you're hopping to a new city or country, but it was definitely one of the highlights of my traveling experiences for sure. And then obviously I've been to 5 continents. I've not been to Africa, but I'd love to go one day. And then obviously Antarctica, I've not been to, but all other continents I've been to.
Yeah, really, really impressive. And Southeast Asia is definitely a place that you can travel to on the cheap. And
Mm-hmm.
so, traveling to Europe for a month is very different than traveling to Southeast Asia. I've been to some of those countries that you mentioned in Southeast Asia, and it's crazy how cheap you can travel. And it's not like you're slumming it. You could travel pretty well in Southeast Asia for a pretty small amount of money. So really interesting. Thanks for sharing a little bit about your background and your interests there. I want to ask you about your transition from software development into commercial real estate brokerage. When you were leaving software development, were you leaving a fair amount of security?
The career field of software development, in my opinion, especially at the time, this is before the big push in AI, but it is a very secure business. I mean, there were at the time when I transitioned, I mean, there were definitely other opportunities out there that I could have taken on and done equally as well. But I knew that the the job itself, although was intellectually stimulating, was not a career field that I could see myself doing for 20, 30, 40 years, which is ultimately what you hope to have in a career, right? You'd hope that whatever you decide to pursue, you can be passionate about for that period of time. And so, yes, you do leave a lot of security. I mean, I was making well over 6 figures at the job that I had before, and I went from making that to, I think my first year I made $13,000. So, it's it's a big jump, but as far as the what made me feel comfortable about transitioning from the software career field into brokerage was that, number one, I actually bought a fourplex. So I had a 4 unit property that we ended up buying before we transitioned to the new career, and I used the rents from that to pay off our mortgage. So my living expenses were very low. I had saved up a good amount of money for my previous career, so I had a big enough of a runway. So even if I had not made a dime my first year, I would have been okay. I would have not been in a situation where I was living on credit cards and putting myself in a really bad financial position. But that's just through the years that I had saved, and ultimately the fourplex that I purchased that helped limit some of the outgoing cash flow. And then again, I will also say my wife at the time, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, was also working a little bit, so she was able to help contribute to some of the household expenses, which helped significantly. So that's kind of what enabled me, or really gave me the courage to be able to do that. I don't think that if I just started from scratch, I don't know if I would have had the courage to do it. But
You mentioned some incredibly useful strategies for people looking to transition from maybe a career of security with W-2 income and benefits to one of more a more entrepreneurial career. And so one thing that you mentioned was a house hack, and house hacking has been integral to my success in investing. And it sounds like you were super strategic with it. You bought a fourplex. You probably got a great loan having a W-2 job. And then once you were settled in that fourplex, you could use the income to pay your mortgage, and then you had the freedom to leave your W-2 job. And so now you had your housing, almost or completely paid for. And then you could, you had a little more flexibility to pursue some of your entrepreneurial pursuits. It sounds like you also had a little bit of a runway fund. You saved some money, and so you weren't totally broke when you decided to go the entrepreneurial route. Can you think of any other strategies that you utilized to make your transition from a more secure W-2 to the entrepreneurial path a little more successful?
Yeah. So one thing I will say that I know it took me a little while to get used to is that when you are in a W-2 role, it's a very structured type of environment. So you're expected to be there at this certain time. You're supposed to work from 8 to 12, and you have lunch, and then you have, maybe 1 to 5 or 6 or 7, depending on the, how demanding the job is. You could potentially push into the night, but regardless of that, you have a very rigid structure in expectation of work. But when you become an entrepreneur, you're your own boss, which is great in that you can kind of name your own times, but it's also bad because you can do what you want. So I think the hardest part for a lot of people when they first get into any entrepreneurial role is that they don't really know what to do with themselves. They feel like they're just kind of like aimless. So I think one of the things that I think I would recommend for people that are looking to do something that is entrepreneurial is to create a schedule or a structure to your day. That's the most important thing, in my opinion, because that allows you to be consistent on a daily basis. And really, all entrepreneurship is building. It's a compound effect. It's you do something every day consistently over time that leads to a positive result. So in order for you to ensure that you can do those things on a daily basis, you have to have some form of schedule and expectations for the day. And so that's what would be my recommendation to entrepreneurs, the people who are aspiring to be entrepreneurs out there.
So that first year in brokerage, as an entrepreneur in brokerage, you are working under other brokers, but it's really feast or famine for the most part in brokerage. And so you go from 6 figures to, I think you said, making $13,000 your first year. That had to have been really humbling. And I imagine there was some questioning along the way of, what did I just do? I just gave up 6 figures to make $13,000 in this new endeavor. Can you talk about some of the challenges that you faced early in your brokerage career and how you overcame them?
Yeah. So that's a great point. And you touched on one of the pieces that's very important to people who are getting started in entrepreneurship is that psychological piece, because you've tied your whole, identity to being someone who is, maybe let's say you have a good career. You've tied your whole identity to being someone who makes a certain amount of income, that has a certain level of prestige or whatever that is. And then now you go into something that you're probably not very good at because you're just starting out at, and the results that you are achieving on a day-to-day are not the same as what you expected. And so it creates this kind of, ill dichotomy between what you think you should be and what you are. But I would say the struggles that I faced was just related to similar to what we described just previously, is not knowing what to do on a day-to-day. I was just kind of aimless. I would just create a list of different people to contact, and I would just randomly call them to see if they wanted to sell, but there was really no value being exchanged or being added, so didn't really get a whole lot there. And then from other parts of the spectrum, all the other stuff that I was working on, you start working with deals and don't you really understand how to screen people, and you're struggling to get people to the finish line because you shouldn't be working with some people in the first place because maybe they don't have the motivation, maybe they don't have the means, or maybe the business idea itself is not going to hold any water. And so I've felt myself spinning my wheels with a lot of people early on that, from the beginning, I probably shouldn't have been spinning my wheels with. And then once COVID hit, that created another layer of complexity, because all the people that I had started to build relationships with that were interested in purchasing or leasing, now all of a sudden the world shut down and they're just like, nah, we're not doing anything. We don't know what's going to happen. And so it created this another kind of hurdle that you had to try to overcome. But I think one of the best things that happened from COVID is it forced me to think outside the box. And so I understood that everyone was at home. We couldn't really do anything. So that's exactly when I started to create all the content online, was that I realized that everyone is on some form of media right now, because there's nothing you can do. You can't walk outside. You can't do anything for it was like a 2-month period where that was the case across the country. And so that's when I started to start my YouTube channel. That's when I decided to start doing the Commercial Real Estate 101 podcast. And ever since then, it's just been a great journey. But it didn't start out anything of significance until, I'd say the last year or two.
And I want to juxtapose that, humble beginning in brokerage, really starting from nothing, to I saw a post that you made recently that said that you just recently closed one of the biggest deals of your career. So first of all, congratulations about that. And can you tell us a little bit about that deal? What was it, and how it came to pass?
Yeah, so it was a great deal. So I'm working with a group in town that owns a large international grocery store chain. So they have 4 locations right now, and this particular property is a multi-tenant center. So it's a 110,000 square foot center, roughly 12 and a half to 13 acres of land, several outlots out front that could be available for national retailers. It's in a great retail corridor with significant traffic counts. And so the acquisition was primarily for my client a future play. So they wanted to buy the property as an investment today, and then ultimately, once one of the larger tenants backs out or leaves, so there's like 40,000 square foot tenants in there, they will backfill it with their grocery store chain. So it was a great fit, because in this current environment, investment property, especially banks, are a little bit more hesitant to lend on investment property. They're not offering, great terms on any investment property right now. So because the potential for backfilling the space was there for this particular property, and they had a really strong relationship with a local lender here, they were able to work out a deal sheet that was very attractive. And because we were a very strong potential buyer, the seller ultimately decided to work with us, and we negotiated a little bit and got a very favorable price. And I think it was a win-win across the board, and that was just under $10 million was the deal size. So
Yeah, amazing. Congrats again on that deal. And lending is super difficult right now. And so your client having that relationship with a local bank, also having the potential to be a user in that space, makes a huge difference. If they were trying to buy it just purely as an investment, it may have been a little bit of a different challenge. Will you talk about, I guess, building your network of potential clients that can take down a $10 million deal? I assume in year one of brokerage, when you're fresh out of software development, you're probably not closing a $10 million deal with that kind of client. So can you talk about some of the steps that you've taken to build relationships with high net worth people that eventually become your clients?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say a lot of it's been very organic, surprisingly. So I'll tell you probably 3 things that I would recommend people start doing in their business to be able to do this. One is obviously outreach. So whether that's cold calling, which for myself, I'm not the greatest at. I'm not super enthusiastic about, but I'm big into canvassing. So I'll just physically go into places and kind of map it out. So I'll try to pick 20 businesses that are in a certain area, and then I'll take a couple hours just to walk in and just introduce myself. So I'll drop off a flyer if I have a center down the street that I'm working with a landlord on or something like that. But trying to create some value for individuals that are ultimately going to be potentially locating in places that you want them to be, or maybe they're looking to expand in some capacity. Those are always great ways to just kind of shake hands and physically meet people, which I'm great in person. Like if I can physically meet you, I'm usually pretty great at being able to just build those relationships. So that's the approach I've taken, but I know a lot of people who had a lot of success just cold calling and really hitting the phones really hard. So that's number one, is just creating a consistent approach to outreach. Number two, I'd say, is the content creation side. In particular, when I'm a big YouTube fan. I think part of the reason for that is because it's a video and audio format. So some people love being able to see someone physically. And I can't tell you how many times I've interacted with people in the community that have said, "Hey, I've seen some of your videos. I feel like I already know you, even though I've never physically met you before." So it helps create that rapport from the get-go, even before you physically meet someone. And another point to that is that sometimes I've called people, like I'll call a building owner and I leave a voicemail, for example, and then they look you up online, and guess what pops up? Your YouTube channel, you have a podcast, if you've written books or whatever that is something that ultimately can benefit you immensely in the future conversations you have with people that may or may not know you, but when they see you online, when they see the content that you've created, it creates this rapport really from day one before you even have a chance to really interact. So that's number two. And then number three is just getting involved in the community. I'm actually, I serve on the board for junior achievement locally here. I was the president of the Young Professionals Board. I was involved with a local organization called Home of the Innocents. I've been involved in, I was in a fraternity in college. I was involved on the board for quite some time here. And I feel like through those connections, people get to interact with you, see how you operate. And obviously you have common interest and common goals because you want to support an organization that's doing great things. And so just naturally there's an organic spread. And, the market that I'm in, it's somewhat of a tight-knit market. It's in Louisville, Kentucky. There's not as many transplants. Like I know if you go to a New York City, Phoenix, where I went to school, Dallas, LA, there's people from all across the country that locate there. And although we have people that do that from here, I mean, there's a lot of people here that have grown up with each other that, it's like a 2-degree separation from people, in this type of community. And we're still a big enough city. We're 1.3 million people, but once you get in with some people, it's very easy to kind of navigate the social hierarchy and waters to be able to get to where you need to go. And so I agree, or I understand that, I may be in a different position because of the fact that I operate in this market, but I would wager to say it's never you're never more than a few connections away from whoever you really want to talk to. So.
Yeah, fantastic value there. Consistent outreach, content creation, community involvement. You talked about canvassing, and I've heard other people talk about canvassing, and I would like to spend just a minute or two on some of your tips, because I've heard that canvassing, just going door to door to businesses and talking with business owners is a great way to get space leased. And for investors, trying to lease up retail space or office suites, something like that, this can be a great strategy for getting space leased up. So can we get super nitty gritty on canvassing? So let's first start with preparation. So let's say you're trying to lease up a space, or you're just trying to build relationships. You said you target maybe 20 businesses and pick out a couple hours one afternoon to go do it. How do you pick out which businesses to target to go canvass?
Yeah, that's a great question, and really, it's on a case by case basis. So you kind of look at the space that you're looking to lease, and I'll just give you an example of one that I'm working on right now. It's a 4,800 square foot property that's kind of an odd property in that it was an old house that was probably 1,600 square feet, and then there's like a garage in the rear that kind of hooks into another larger garage space. But it's a great property for potential adaptive reuse, and so the tenants we were trying to attract to that space, again, they have to be able to fit in that total space. And so we were targeting, furniture stores. We were targeting, even restaurant users. We were targeting health spas, because the place it's located in town, it would support that type of user. And so it's really, you have to first get a nitty gritty understanding of what the area is, what the area could support. And if it's in a multi-tenant center, what other uses are on site that could potentially be cross-pollinate one another. And then you just come up with a list of different properties to be able, or different users to be able to target. Now, what I've done is I have a virtual assistant that I've hired in the Philippines. And so what I would do is I would give her the list of uses and say, hey, try to find users that fit this description that have at least one location, or 2 locations is what we would target. So the reason why you'd like to try to target 2 locations is because, number one, you already know that they're interested in expanding. And number 2 is that oftentimes, it's a lot more stable of a tenant if they have several locations, they got more cash flow, et cetera. So you come up with a list from there. And then, the reason I said about 20 is because that's about the amount of businesses I can hit in a 2-hour block. And usually I'll block it out between 1 and 3 p.m. because for most retail stores, restaurants typically open for lunch rush. So you're from 11 to call it 1:30. That's kind of the lunch rush. And then it tapers off around 2 p.m. So usually you try to hit the restaurants after the lunch rush so people are a lot less stressed. And then throughout any retail store, I mean, you can walk in at any time, but I try to plan my timing around, kind of beating the lunch rush on the restaurant side. And then on the retail side, it really doesn't matter, but it just makes it 1 to 3 just seems to work well for me. But yeah, outside of that, you try to come in with something. I usually have a flyer that I create that either highlights the particular property, or if I don't have a property to offer, I'll create like a area overview and share like average rents for the area, maybe provide some comps, just some data that's actually going to benefit the person that's going to be reviewing it. And so, I'll typically walk in and introduce myself and, let them know about why I'm there. And if, the owner or manager or anyone would be available to have a conversation. And, sometimes it works. Most of the time it works. Most people are pretty receptive to it, in particular if you approach them in a very casual way. So I've never really had too much issue with just making it to whoever I need to talk to. And then I just share that information. And if I can get a business card from them, I'll try to get a business card so I can follow up. But sometimes they don't have one on them. And, I'll, if there's any interest, obviously I'll try to see if I can come in again at some point to just kind of follow up. So that's the high level strategy of what I do. I know maybe there's probably ways to maybe improve that, but it's what I've had success with.
Yeah, I mean, that's really helpful. So I've been in this position before, and I've also cold called before. And one obstacle that I always hit is there's always some gatekeeper. There's someone at the front desk, there's someone answering the phones, and they are not the decision maker, but they have access to the decision maker. So walk me through, you walk into a business that you're targeting, there's someone at the front desk and they say, "Hi, how can I help you?" Can you walk me through how that goes so you can get to the decision maker?
Yeah, so I may say something along the lines of, "Hello, well, my name is Raphael Collazo. I'm a commercial real estate broker here in Louisville, and we actually have a property right around the corner over here that is available for lease. What are your guys' expansion plans?" And so they may say something along the lines of, "Well, I'm not the manager, or I'm not the owner." And I say, "Oh, okay. Well, do you mind if I have a conversation with the manager or owner?" And, you put them on the spot. And most of the time, I mean, I've had success with that. I think what it comes down to is if you just walk in and say, "Hey, are you the owner? Hey, are you the manager?" Then it creates this kind of like, because they don't know what you want. They think you're some sort of, they think you're a salesman, which you are. But again, part of it is that you're trying to lower the barrier of resistance. So the best way to approach it, and I actually learned this from Beth Azor, who's a big leasing, the leasing queen, as they describe her, but really just providing them with the question of what are your expansion plans, and assuming that they are the owner, which in fact they could very well be the owner. You don't know. That has led to some success because then they'll tell you whether or not they're the decision maker. So,
Yep, I really like that. I really like starting off with a conversation with whoever is there at the entrance, because they could be the owner or the decision maker. And I think it also maybe gets their guard down, because if you walk in and just say, "Hey, can I talk to the owner?" It kind of puts them on guard, maybe makes them a little defensive, and makes them act as more of a gatekeeper versus being a customer service person like you want them to be. So really good stuff. Thank you for that. I want to get to kind of the last few years of you building your personal brand. You are incredibly active on the internet. You're active on LinkedIn and YouTube. You've had multiple podcasts. You've written books. So can you talk about kind of your overall strategy? So you went through it a little bit before about content creation, and you take it very seriously. So will you talk about how all of these things fit together into a strategy? What are you trying to accomplish by being so active in all these different areas?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, it does seem like I'm creating a bunch of content, which I am. I'm not going to undermine that, but I think part of it is that once you create content, you can repurpose it a lot. So, I don't want people to get discouraged and think, oh my gosh, these people are creating so much content. There's no way I could possibly do that. Every week I create one video on Monday. It's called my frequently asked question video. So I answer a question that either the community asks or maybe it's a common question I've gotten asked in my business, and then I just answer it. Then I may have every other week I have the commercial real estate one-on-one podcast, which I schedule out, every other week and usually weeks in advance. So that's one other commitment. And then recently I've been doing a live stream with my buddies, Chad Griffiths, who you just interviewed, and then Henry Eisenstein. We do something on a Wednesday, once a week, and just kind of talk about different news articles that are in the commercial real estate space. So really, I mean, if you think about it, that's about 3 hours, maybe. I mean, really, the first video that I created probably takes me 10, 15 minutes. So call it 10, 15 minutes. And then the other two are 2 hours. So really a week, maybe 3 to 4 hours is dedicated to content creation. So it's not a significant amount of time. So I just wanted to kind of create that, expectation so people didn't think it didn't get overwhelmed by it. But as far as the strategy for what I'm doing, it's more about just, where attention goes, energy flows. So if more and more people know about what I'm doing, ultimately that's going to lead to more opportunity long term. And my aspirations long term are to have, to take on different development projects. I'm taking on my first small development project here locally. And so I'm doing that with a business partner of mine, and we raised some capital from friends and family and people we know to get the project done. But our aspirations are to continue to grow that. So, maybe we take on another adaptive reuse project where we need to raise money. One of the great ways to be able to do that is to have people that you've built relationships with over time. And, you could do that at scale when you do stuff like this online. So that's part of it. And then on the book writing side, I think, it's kind of a interesting reason as to why I decided. I started writing back in Puerto Rico before I even got into commercial real estate. And that was related to personal and professional development for young professionals. And I just took that same skill that I developed into the commercial real estate space because I felt there was no content out there on the book side. So I created the book series, so my first book's Before You Sign That Lease, then it's Before You Buy That Building, and then Before You Sell That Building. And then I'm actively writing my next book, which is Before You Invest in That Building, which is, the investor's guide to investing in passive deals. So what type of questions do you need to ask a syndicator before you invest money with them? I'll write a book called Before You Develop That Building. So it's, it's just kind of, it explains the different niches of commercial real estate. And ultimately that benefits me because it helps my clients, because I obviously can hand it off to them and they can read it, and then their expectations have been set. It's helped me win business like you wouldn't believe. I show up to a listing appointment and I provide them with a copy of my book at the end and say, hey, if you have any questions about the listing or selling process, here's my book, Before You Sell That Building. I highlight the entire process from start to finish. Oh, and here's the Audible book too, if you prefer to listen to it in Audible. So it just creates like that bombardment of value. So, it's a multifaceted reason as to why I decided to be as active as I have online, but suffice it to say, it's all for the purposes of trying to build the different verticals that I'd like to within my business, which is brokerage, investment, and development.
Love it. I want to ask you one more question about your YouTube channel. I think you mentioned earlier that it's really started to get some good traction in the last year or two, but you've been active for longer than a year or two. So can you talk about maybe the early stages of having an online presence, of posting on LinkedIn or Instagram, posting YouTube videos, and feeling like you're not getting much traction, and feeling like, well, nobody's watching, or very few people are watching, nobody's listening, nobody's reaching out. Why am I doing this? Versus where you're at now. Can you talk about kind of the journey and how to stick with it when you don't seem to be getting much traction?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I actually started. I looked back the other day because I had some friends over for 4th of July, and we saw the first video I recorded on YouTube, and it was cringeworthy. I'll probably post it this week as kind of a, just a status update. But yeah, I posted my first video at the end of 2016. So, that's 8 years ago. And really, I didn't really start pushing hard on YouTube until, call it 2018 or so. And I was really like, there were times where I was posting 3 times a week, and I would hire someone on Fiverr to edit the videos and really try to make it as high quality as I could based on the equipment that I had. But yeah, it's disheartening when you post a lot of content and no one watches it, and you get, I had people at work that would give me ribs because they're like, oh, that's weird, like, why are you doing that? So sometimes you hear it from people that in your life about why you're doing what you're doing. So it's definitely not a pleasant experience to start off, but I always took the approach of, I was refining a skill set that was going to benefit me in the long run. Because it's a skill to be in front of a camera and be able to convey a message in an eloquent way. It's not a natural thing for a lot of people to do that, and especially not me. I'm an engineer by trade. I'm not a extrovert by nature typically. So ultimately, being able to refine those skills is something that I was able to do throughout the period of time that I was creating the content and no one was watching. And the benefit of that is that you get to refine your skills and no one's watching. So people aren't judging you as much because no one's really watching what you're doing anyways. So it's not a big deal. But yeah, I would say just be consistent about it. And it, starting out, even doing a video a week and something small. I don't ever edit my frequently asked questions videos. I just record and then throw it up there. And sometimes I have ums and I have ahs and whatever else, but at the end of the day, you're getting the point across and you're creating some content that is going to be of benefit to you in the long run. And so that's what I would recommend. Understand that in the beginning, you're not going to have a lot of people watch your stuff, which is a value to you. This is a unique opportunity for you to be able to refine the skills that you're going to need to be able to retain a larger audience in the future. So take that as an opportunity for yourself, and then just be consistent. There's one of the most profound books I've ever read is The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy, which talks about small, positive, consistent action over time adds up to massive results. So view this as a 5 to 10 year plan as opposed to a 2 to 3 month plan. That you're not going to get 1 million subscribers in 2 months. You could, and that's a unicorn thing to happen, but I wouldn't ever go into a business or any type of endeavor expecting the unicorn result, because it's a unicorn for a reason.
Yeah, really good stuff. That's inspiring. I need to hear that kind of stuff. And so I really appreciate you sharing just some of your experience and how you overcame some of those obstacles. Raphael, as we get to the tail end of our conversation, I want to give you a chance to plug Louisville as a market for investors to consider for investment properties. So will you just, for people kind of like myself who don't know a lot about Louisville as an MSA, you talked about it having over 1 million people. When you said that, I was like, seriously? Louisville has over 1 million people? So talk a little bit about what Louisville has going for it and why people should pay attention to it.
Yeah, no, it really is a great city. I think there's definitely certain challenges we face, more so on the development side, and in particular in Jefferson County, which is the main area that encompasses Louisville Metro. But there are some grassroots effort to be able to improve that process, more so related to the timing of rezoning. It just takes a long time. But I will say, from an investment standpoint, I think similar to a lot of cities in the middle of the country, the affordability in Louisville is very attractive to a lot of people. You're still it's very reasonable for people to expect to be able to buy a home in Louisville, as opposed to some other markets where it's just completely outside the realm of possibilities for the average first-time home buyer. The average rents in the area are also very achievable for a lot of people as well. So if you're a multifamily investor, being able to invest in an area that is growing and then also has pretty stable rent increases is of value. We are a logistical hub. UPS has a headquarters here, and they actually have commandeered a section of the airport, and they handle a lot of transport there. So we have a large industrial park near the airport, and again, there's a large logistical hub. So we have one of the largest industrial parks in the state here, Bluegrass Industrial Park, and you're talking about, I think the vacancy rate there, it's similar to a lot of places around the country, but the vacancy rate there just in the last year was roughly 1.2%. So obviously very, very profitable for the city and Jeffersontown in particular, which is the subsect that's in that area. And then on the retail side, which is where I operate at, there's a lot of major corridors in the area that help support a vibrant retail market. I also speak Spanish. I'm half Puerto Rican, and there's a very large international community here. We are a refugee city, so that means that there's certain cities around the country that are designated for refugees to locate to when they seek asylum from other countries. Louisville happens to be one, so we have a very large African population. We have a very large Southeast Asian population that came, after the Vietnam War. The Bosnian population when everything was happening in Eastern Europe in the 90s, and in particular the Cuban population, which is the largest outside of Florida. So we are receiving roughly 1,000 or 700 to 1,000 Cuban immigrants per month are locating to the metro. So that's one of the largest growing sectors in the entire city. And what happens when you have a growing population is that you have to have services that encompass them to support that population. And so you're starting to see a very vibrant Latino community, Latino business community in particular, which, it's almost impossible to service. I mean, I have many Latin clients, and I get calls all the time from people who are looking to either open a business or expand their existing business or whatever else. So there's a lot to like about Louisville. And if you understand the dynamics at play in the market, I think there's definitely a lot of there's opportunities out there for individuals. So
awesome stuff, Raphael. True to form, you've added a ton of value today. Just every response to your question is just adding tons of value, and so really appreciate this conversation today. If listeners want to connect with you or learn more about you, where would you like to send people?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty accessible, and you can just look me up online at Raphael Collazo. I should be the first name that pops up, and you can reach out to me directly via my cell. My cell is readily available. My email is on there as well, Raphael at GrisantiGroup.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I'd love to continue to connect with people on LinkedIn. Please like and subscribe to the channel. I mean, again, it does make it ability to reach a broader audience. It's always great to be able to do that. So yeah, those are probably the best ways to be able to reach out.
Yeah, Raphael can be found almost everywhere. And if you're looking to just get some value and learn more about commercial real estate, Raphael has tons of content, whether it's on YouTube or LinkedIn or his books. He is a wealth of knowledge and experience and expertise. So he is a good person to be following and to reach out to. Raphael, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Jonathan. It was great.
Listeners, if you enjoyed this conversation, feel free to reach out to either one of us and follow and subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening. We will have another great interview coming next week. Listeners, we appreciate you. Thank you so much. Until next time.